Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you once again for joining us. Today, I want us to summarize or analyze The Fathers of Nations, a novel by Paul B. Vita. And this is a novel that talks about or gives us a picture of the African politics and the challenges that are affecting the African continent. And it's a book that really reflects on really the life that Africans face in the hands of their political class. So, are you interested in African literature? Are you interested in history and politics? Are you interested in social science or social justice? Or are you interested in politics of developing countries? Fathers of Nations has it all. And you might be wondering, well, why did Paul B. Vita is the author of this book? Why would he give this book such a title? What does it really mean? So this title, Fathers of Nations, is from the book. It's satire. It's a satirical reference to the self-proclaimed titles of many African leaders that they give themselves. So a father of a nation, father of the nation, is a title that African leaders give themselves. Probably it's given to the founding fathers. Okay, so this title is often used to suggest that these leaders are wise, they are benevolent, and they are responsible for the creation of their respective nations. That is, founding fathers or fathers of nations. It's a title that they give themselves. So, however, in this novel, Fathers of Nations, now the Vita's novel exposes that hypocrisy of those titles by showing how African leaders are often very corrupt, self-serving, and more interested in enriching themselves than in developing their nations. Number two, the title is also a commentary on the paternalistic attitude, from the word paternal, that many African leaders have towards their people. These leaders often see themselves as guardians of their nations, and they believe that they know what is best for their people. However, in this novel, Paul shows that this paternalism can be harmful and can prevent African people from taking responsibility for their own development. So this novel, Fathers of Nation, is a powerful indictment of the corruption and paternalism that are often present in African politics. This title is a reminder that African leaders are not above scrutiny and that they must be held accountable for their actions. So, well, maybe you might want to know what this story, just the plot of the story. What is the plot of the Fathers of Nations? How does the story go about? Okay, so that's what I want to give you very, 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 very quick. So, Fathers of Nations by Paul Vita is a compelling narrative that weaves together the lives of four men. So those are the four. Of course, there are other characters, built-in characters, but the four main characters are four men from different corners of Africa. These are Professor Kimani, Comrade Melusi, Engineer Tahir, and Pastor Chiamaka. So those are the four main characters. Remember, we said there are others, but they build on these four. So these characters have all faced personal hardships, injustices, and economic struggles under their respective governments. United by their shared desire to transform Africa's economic structures, they converge at a summit. And this summit takes place in Gambia and in an hotel, that is Seamount Hotel in Banjul, that is in Gambia, where African heads of state are set to consider and adopt a transformative document. So these four guys here are not presidents. Okay? So, but we have a conference or a summit that African heads of state are going, and the purpose of that conference is for them to consider and adopt a transformative document for the continent. But these guys are picked. The four of them, they have shared personal hardships, injustices, and economic struggles under their respective governments. So they've gone through some challenges and hardships under their respective governments from where they come from. So we can say these guys were picked by a certain by another outsider, another character. We shall know about him, okay? And they are presented with what is going to happen in that summit. So they are told what is going to happen in that summit, but they are given another alternative that they'll go to champion for. Okay, so those protagonists, guided by a common acquaintance, share a history of suffering under their governments, serving as a powerful motivation to seek change. So they will all be members, or they'll all be attendees. They are not official attendees, but they'll attend to that summit because they've been motivated, or they've been brought together by the hardships that they've gone through. These guys didn't know each other before. They were brought together by another character that we shall know. So those individual stories, marked by personal losses and political oppression, highlight the pervasive issues across the continent. As they push for change, they are joined by other dissatisfied individuals, along with the support of a journalist. We will see she was called Fiona, and Nicholas. So the narrative unfolds against the backdrop of a summit. We've said that that narrative happens during a summit in Gambia's capital, that is in Banjul, where 50 heads of state gather to debate or deliberate on Way Omega ideology. So we have an ideology that is being brought by European leaders or European countries, and the name of that ideology is Way Omega. They are saying that ideology is a transformative package. If Africa wants to be helped in terms of finances, economy, and so on, that transformation of Africa, they have to adopt and agree with the ideology that we are calling what? Way Omega. Okay, so that ideology is championed by Minister Zinto, who advocates for a common growth strategy to secure continued support from donors through aid and grants. However, dissident arises in form of Path Alpha. Who is coming with Path Alpha and who is advocating for Path Alpha? We now have another new ideology, Path Alpha. This is the ideology that these four main characters are championing in that summit. So that is an alternative ideology that is put forth by AGDA. We'll see the meaning. AGDA came up with that ideology, and AGDA looked for these four individuals who had suffered, who had hardships with their respective governments. Okay, so that ideology is brought together by AGDA and Mr. Thaddeus Longway. So that second ideology, the alternative ideology, is not the ideology that is being debated upon or being adopted in the summit. In the summit, they all know of Way Omega. Okay, but we have another alternative that these four guys will champion so that it can be adopted. So Path Alpha, which seeks to minimize public resistance to change, gains traction among the heads of state as now the debate continues, and the story builds tension as the two ideologies, that is Way Omega and Path Alpha, clash during the summit. The leaders, many of whom are depicted as aged and dictatorial, grapple with the decision of adopting one of these strategies. So they struggle. They are so old. They are so dictatorial. So they grapple with the decision of adopting. Do we adopt Way Omega or do we adopt Path Alpha? So the climax of the story occurs when a committee, which was named the Method Committee, that is chaired by President Dindia Bangura, and that is established to settle the debate. So they cannot come to a conclusion, all these presidents. So they form a committee, and the committee is called what? Method Committee. It's chaired by President Dida. All right. It's the purpose of that committee is to bring uniformity and to settle the debate. So the president, who is struggling with senility, employs unconventional methods such as coin toss and choice matrix to decide whether which ideology will pick the day. So in a surprising turn of events, Path Alpha emerges victorious, and that signals a triumph for the ordinary citizens who have long suffered under oppressive regimes. So Way Omega was somehow favoring the presidents to continue with corruption, tribalism, and so on, because the European donors would collide with the presidents, the African presidents, and the long chain of corruption and embezzlement of funds and the exploitation of Africa will still continue. But this path that is Path Alpha emerges to counter that, and it wins the day. And that's why we are saying that it is a triumph for the ordinary citizens who have suffered long enough under oppressive regimes. So the win for Path Alpha signifies a positive step towards addressing the challenges which are faced by the people, emphasizing that on the power of collective action and strategic advocacy in shaping the future of the continent. So the narrative skillfully combines personal struggles, political intrigue, and the broader theme of societal transformation, making Fathers of Nations such a thought-provoking and impactful story. So that is the plot summary of Fathers of Nations. If you didn't know about that book or what it entails, that is a plot summary of two ideologies here, Way Omega and Path Alpha. One of them is oppressing the citizens of Africa. That's one of them is oppressive to Africans. Another one is a triumph. It's a win for the African citizens. So this book is all about the exploitation of Africa by foreign powers, particularly through the use of corrupt and self-serving African leaders. So this book brings out that exploitation of Africa by who? By foreign powers. But they do that indirectly. They use the corrupt and self-serving African leaders. So the novel is a sharp and insightful satire of contemporary African politics. That's why we are calling it a satire. Father of Nations, remember we said the meaning of that title and the significance is the paternal figure and the fathers. That is the title that is given to African leaders that is used to suggest that these leaders are wise, benevolent, and they know what is good for the citizens of their nations. But it's a satire. The leaders or the African leaders went for something else. They were going to adopt something else. Okay, so I'll not go deeper into each of the chapters' story in detail, but I leave links to other short videos that I've made about specific chapters. There are 14 chapters. I've gone through each of the chapters. You can always have a listen, and you can also have a read. We also have a detailed study guide of Fathers of Nations. So if you're a student who is taking this as a set book, you must go and check at our study guide. It's so detailed that it will leave you not asking for more. You'll gain. So what you'll need are just the questions. All right. So where will you get this study guide for free? Go to our website, vidanmeds.com/. blog. Or when you go to that website, just click on the tab that is under blog, and then search for Fathers of Nations. It's a comprehensive study guide that we'll use. Alternatively, I'll also leave a link to the same below the description. You can also click on that link and it will take you direct to that study guide. So for now, it is beyond the scope of this video. I'll not go into detail about each of the 14 chapters, but I've said there are videos, short videos that are dedicated to those chapters, or to those different chapters, the 14 of them. So I'll also still mention briefly about some characters. The main ones. Remember, we've known of the four main characters, and of course there are others. All right, there are other characters. We also have themes. We're also supposed to know about the themes, and probably ways on how you can apply the book's knowledge. How can we apply the book's knowledge in real life? Right. So I want to maybe briefly go through main characters and their roles in this novel. So, and if you are not a student, this book is a read, because it's exactly what is happening in our African countries, or in any country in the world. Corruption is everywhere. There's no country that can brag that it doesn't have corruption. So this book is a must read for anyone who is patriotic and who is yearning for a positive change in their current setup of African politics. So the four characters, or the main characters, include Professor Kimani. We've said that Professor Kimani came from Kenya, and in the novel he serves as one of those central figures in the novel. He is deeply motivated by personal losses. Remember, those four individuals were brought together by hardships, by struggles that they went through in the hands of their respective governments. So Professor Kimani has had his share of hardships from the Kenyan government, because we are told from the novel that he hails from Kenya. So he is motivated by personal losses, having lost his wife, who was Adio Mondi, to a former university colleague who turned a politician. So Professor Kimani's wife was married by his closest friend, but that closest friend turned out to be what? They used to work together at the University of Nairobi. That's where Professor Kimani used to work. So this guy who married, who took Professor's wife, was a junior, but he went to politics, and now he is an MP, a member of parliament. So he has a much greater command than Professor. So you see that commotion of politics and personal life. So Kimani, or Professor Kimani, cannot go to a court and maybe challenge. And I think in the novel he tried that, challenge this friend for taking his wife. Right? Politics. He can't win that case. So that friend turns out to be a politician. Then another pain that Professor also has is the loss of his daughter Tuni in a fatal accident. So Professor Kimani is committed to advocating for change in the economic structures of Africa, and plays a very crucial role in mobilizing support for the alternative ideology Path Alpha. So some of the traits include that he is very resilient, he is very determined, he is also grieving because of those two losses, and he's also very strategic. In the novel, we understand that he managed to bring some changes in the University of Nairobi. That's where probably some of his problems came from. But he was very strategic, very visionary, very determined, and very resilient in the face of adversities. We have Comrade Melusi. It's another character. So Comrade Melusi is a former politician who has suffered under a new head of state and serves as another key character. So Comrade Melusi is a retired president, a former politician, not president, a former politician, but he has been suffering, or he has suffered lately under the new government in his country. He has experienced personal tragedy such as losing his wife Zaliza in a massacre and witnessing the ruthless suppression of his Ndebele people. Comrade Melusi is driven by the desire to address the injustices which are imposed by the government and actively participates in promoting the Path Alpha strategy or ideology. So some of the traits include that he is politically experienced, he knows the politics, he knows the good and the bad, he is very passionate, he is also a mourning person and very courageous. We have Engineer Tahir. Who is Engineer Tahir? So Engineer Tahir is a nuclear bomb expert who is dissatisfied with African leadership and is very instrumental in the efforts against Way Omega ideology. His technical expertise contributes to the strategic planning of the group advocating for change. Remember, it's a group made up of these four main. Remember, this group was brought together by an agency that we talked about, AGDA, and that agency, of course, had some others. We also had a journalist and so on. So Engineer Tahir aims to address the economic and political issues that are plaguing the continent. And some of the traits include it's very technical, that is, he has a very technical expertise, a very high technical expertise. He's a strategic thinker and is very visionary. You have Pastor Chiamaka. Pastor Chiamaka is an outspoken man who faces imprisonment for his criticism of the government and is deterred from preaching. His commitment to justice and his people's well-being drives him to participate actively in the movement for change. Pastor Chiamaka is a vocal advocate for the Path Alpha strategy. He's very outspoken. Those are some of the traits. Very outspoken, resilient, passionate, and committed. With Dr. Afolabi Abiola. Who is Dr. Afolabi Abiola? Probably we've not mentioned about him, but he is a very, very key person or a very key character in this narrative. So Dr. Afolabi, abandoned by his American wife Pamela, becomes involved in the movement for change due to personal disillusionment and the desire for a better future. His character brings a different perspective to the group, emphasizing the impact of personal experiences on the broader societal context. He is very delusioned, introspective, adaptive, and contemplative. We have Mr. Thaddeus Longway. So Mr. Thaddeus Longway plays a significant role in championing the Path Alpha strategy as a key figure associated with the AGDA. Remember, AGDA is the Agency for Governance and Development in Africa. Agency for Governance and Development in Africa is the one that came up with what? Path Alpha. And Path Alpha is being championed to those four main characters by this guy, Mr. Thaddeus Longway. So he brings that idea to those four individuals. He brings an intellectual and organizational aspect to the movement. His character embodies a strategic and calculated approach to enacting change. He is very intellectual, strategic, calculated, and influential. Those are some of the four key traits. We have Fiona Mackenzie, who is a Voice of America journalist, and Nicholas Sentinel, or simply is referred to as Nick in the book. So with those two, let's call them journalists. But the main journalist there is Fiona Mackenzie, who is the Voice of Africa, VOA, journalist, and we have a correspondent there, Nicholas Sentinel. So Fiona Mackenzie is a journalist, and Nicholas Sentinel is a support, or provides support to the protagonists in their mission by planning and executing the presentation of the alternative ideology before the heads of state. All right, so he's like the technical guy, He's like the technical guy who presents or does the presentation, planning and executing the presentation. He plans that and he does that very, very well. So those two, that is Fiona and Nick, act as catalysts for spreading awareness and gaining support for their change. So those two, that is Fiona and Nicholas, are very resourceful, determined, investigative, and supportive. So all those diverse, we've talked of 7 men, all those 7 main diverse characters in this book, Fathers of Nations, contribute to unique perspective, skills, and personal motivations to the collective effort to challenge the existing political and economic structures in Africa. So those are the main characters. So what have I given you in this summary? I've given you the meaning of the title. Why did Paul use Fathers of Nations, the title? What it is all about. I've given you a plot of the story. What is the story all about? Just briefly. And I've also given you the main characters and some of their traits. So what I've not given you is an in-depth or detailed chapter by chapter summary of the book. I've also not given you themes because they are very deep. So themes which are presented, but in the preceding videos I can also be making another separate video for themes which are presented in the book. But in the meantime, you can, if probably at the time you are listening to this one, maybe you have not have produced a video on the themes, you can still get an in-depth write-up of the same in our guide. That is the Fathers of Nation Ultimate Study Guide. It's in our website, vidanmeds.com/blog, then Fathers of Nations. You just search in there in the search bar, or I have a link to the same below this description. So we have the themes. I have 10 themes for you, detailed, in-depth. Then I'll tell you in that guide more about Paul. Who is Paul Vita? I'll also give you about key takeaways and conclusions. I'll also give you some comparison between this book and other books on the same subject, the target audience and intended readership, critical response and acclaim. This is the positive reviews and the negative reviews of different people who have read this book. I'll also give you some book recommendations, other books. Maybe you are a reading enthusiast, literature enthusiast. So do you need more books about African literature that you can read? I have a list of 10 more recommendations that you can read that are related to African landscape, African setting. They are written by Africans. I have a list of 10. You will get them still in our guide. Then I'll also give you specific ways or specific examples and ways in which we can apply the knowledge that we gain or the lessons that we learn from this book in real life. How can we apply them or these lessons in real life? I still have a list for you, list of tips and specific examples. So that is all for now. With this summary of Fathers of Nations, I hope you've gotten the big picture, the big idea, and I know you'll go into our guide to get an in-depth analysis of Fathers of Nations. So until next time, continue reading, continue evolving, continue becoming better, and continue developing yourself. From Vidan Meds, we say thank you and have a good time.